My name is David Packouz, and I'm a former arms dealer. I was arrested for trafficking $300 million worth of arms internationally. And this is how crime works. There's a lot more stuff going on behind the scenes than people think. And usually with the consent of the major powers involved. When we started winning big contracts, that's when I really started feeling like we were treading in deep waters. I feel like I got incredibly lucky. I went through a crazy experience and I managed to avoid getting killed and I managed to avoid doing prison time, and for that I am eternally grateful. And I got a really cool movie made about my life, and how many people can say that, right? Well, I never expected to become an arms dealer, that's for sure. I was in my early 20s going to college studying chemistry and working part-time as a massage therapist, and I had a few side businesses selling SD cards online, selling bed sheets and linens and towels to nursing homes. And then I bumped into a friend of mine that I had known since I was a kid, a guy named Efraim Diveroli, and his company was called AEY Inc. We started out as friends. Every waking moment we had, we were slaving away, trying to win contracts, deliver on contracts, finding sources. So we saw this solicitation posted on the government website, and it was all munitions. So it wasn't for weapons, it was all for the stuff that gets fired by the weapons. It's like 150 million rounds for the AK-47, 30 million rounds for the PKM machine gun, 1.1 million grenades, something like 70,000 anti-aircraft rockets. The quantities were enormous. We'd never seen anything even close to this. This particular contract was going to the Afghan National Army. It was being supplied by the US Army because we had invaded Afghanistan after September 11th. The Bush administration decided to arm the Afghans to the teeth so that they wouldn't have to worry about running out of munitions if the next administration would pull out of Afghanistan. Legally, the contracting officer in the federal government are not allowed to tell you what the other competitors bid at. But the contracting officer told me over the phone, you know, we really want to help you guys out because we want to see you succeed. You guys were just so incredibly competitive. You came in $52 million under the next competitor. And we were competing against multi-billion-dollar publicly traded companies with like 70 years of experience. They did a series of audits on our company, and that included a financial audit. They wanted to see we had a whole bunch of money, logistics audit. They also had a supply audit where they asked us to list all of our suppliers. You are required to provide documentation as far as where it's coming from and where it's going to. So they will require an EUC, which is an end user certificate. The issue is if a military loses control of their equipment, then it doesn't matter how many end user certificates they signed, it may end up in the hands of someone that was not intended. You saw videos of the Taliban riding American Humvees and shooting American weapons, including all the munitions that we shipped to Afghanistan. When we won the contract, it felt amazing. Efraim picked me up and he told me, he's like, get dressed, we're going to celebrate. And he takes me to this Italian restaurant. He orders a whole bunch of champagne for the table. People think it was just, you know, all fun and games and we're just going out there and partying it up in Miami and doing drugs and meeting women and whatever. And there's a small element of that, but we actually worked a lot more than we partied. Before I got into this business, I didn't know anything about arms. I never even owned a gun. When we started winning big contracts and started getting affected by the international political situation, that's when I really started feeling like we were treading in deep waters. So the United States is actually the biggest arms manufacturer in the world, by far, and biggest arms exporter in the world. So there's two major calibers in the world. That's two different weapon systems. There's the Warsaw Pact, which is manufactured by the former Soviet Union republics. And there's NATO, which is manufactured by the NATO alliance, the West, and they're not intercompatible. The United States doesn't manufacture Warsaw Pact weapons. So when they want to supply a country with Warsaw Pact weapons, then they need to go to third parties, and that's mostly the former Soviet republics. The United States places various countries on arms embargoes for various reasons. China was placed on an arms embargo in 1989 because there was the infamous Tiananmen Square massacre. They also placed Russia on an arms embargo shortly before they awarded us the contract. Originally, the United States was planning to buy all the munitions directly from Russia because they were the only single supplier that could supply the entire list of munitions that the United States was looking to buy. And that's why they put the contract out for bid for a broker like us to give them a single price for everything, because they didn't want to deal with 50 people, so they would rather deal with a middleman who dealt with all the end suppliers for them. For the small caliber ammunition, which was the 7.62 by 39 ammo, the ammunition used by the AK-47, which is the standard assault rifle of the Warsaw Pact, the best price that we got was from the country of Albania. At the time, Albania had a massive stockpile of Warsaw Pact ammunition, and they were trying to join the NATO alliance. And NATO was requiring them to get rid of all their old Soviet ammunition. I think that there's probably more labor law violations making clothing than there are making arms. The issue with the arms industry as far as worker safety is that they are manufacturing dangerous goods, and obviously manufacturers want to avoid disasters like that because it's bad for business. It's not good for their bottom line when their factory blows up. So they do care about avoiding things like that. On the other hand, there was an infamous occurrence in Albania at a town called Gerdek, where the Albanian government was in the process of dismantling some of their old Soviet-era ammunition. They were doing it in an irresponsible way, and it caused, I think, the largest non-nuclear explosion in history. The way the Albanian deal happened for us is that we had been doing business with a Swiss arms dealer named Henry Tomei. In the movie, he's played by Bradley Cooper, and he was very connected, particularly in the Balkans. And that's how he was able to get this deal for the AK-47 ammo at such a good price for us. We were paying Henry, and Henry was paying the Albanians. We met Henry through our investor. Efraim didn't have that money, and so he was looking for investors, and his father introduced him to someone that he had done business with, a guy named Ralph Merrill. So Ralph had been doing business with Henry since the early 90s. Henry tried to keep as low of a profile as possible. You would never look at him twice, just passing him on the street. He looked like a bank teller. There are many middlemen involved in the arms trade, and you usually only discover them when they get busted by some various law enforcement operation. Victor Bout is the most famous middleman. He's the Russian arms dealer that Nicolas Cage's character in Lord of War is based on. Most middlemen try to operate as much as they can within the limits of the law. It's just less risky that way. And Henry was the same way. I mean, he still has to worry about the international system and the various organizations that may want to interfere with his business transactions. And so he has to arrange his logistics and his sources of supply with that in mind. It was a team of people that would open up the wooden crates, open up the metal tins, put the ammunition into these thick plastic bags, and put it into these double-walled corrugated cardboard boxes. That way we were able to minimize the shipping weight, because we were shipping everything by air into Afghanistan, because Afghanistan is surrounded by unstable countries and it's very dangerous to do arms shipment overland to Afghanistan. Alex was my best friend when we were looking for someone to manage the repackaging situation in Albania. We hired him to go over there and do that. At first, we didn't know we would be doing repackaging, but we wanted him to just go there and inspect it because he had some military experience. And then he discovered that the ammunition was Chinese origin. There were Chinese markings all over the wooden crates and all over the metal tins. Efraim's like, listen, we're only going to be talking about this over the phone, okay, just in case. We can't, no emails, no text messages. But then Efraim wanted to make sure that Alex was giving him correct information, so he insisted that Alex email him pictures of the boxes of the crates. And then everyone just started talking about it openly, and there built up quite a few number of emails where it was very, very obvious and specific about what we were doing. We just didn't want to take the risk of losing a $300 million contract. And so we thought, well, you know, maybe we shouldn't tell them. Maybe we should just repackage the ammunition so they don't suspect a thing. And so that's what we did. We hired an Albanian guy named Kosta Trebishka, who owned a cardboard box manufacturing company in Albania, to provide the boxes and to provide the labor to repackage the ammunition to get rid of all the Chinese markings. And we started delivering it in that configuration. It was about 100 million rounds that we had to repackage. We weren't 100% sure it was illegal because the ammunition we were buying from Albania had originally come from China, but it had come from China in the 70s, which is well before the arms embargo was actually put in place. So this ammunition didn't violate the terms of the arms embargo. It was legal as far as the terms of the arms embargo, but it did violate the terms of our commercial contract with the Army. If were going to deliver this ammo, it was going to be a breach of contract because our contract specifically said no Chinese ammo, period. Where they stored all the weapons and ammo were in the small arms anyway, were in underground bunkers. They built a massive network in Albania of underground bunkers, and they filled that with all the small arms and ammunition in order to protect them against bombardment. So when we went over there to inspect it, that's where they took us to these really long, narrow underground bunkers. Anyone who knows the history of Albania would know that the vast majority of their munitions came from China. Us, as a couple of kids from Miami, we didn't know this. The US Army should have known it. Whether they knew it from the beginning, I don't know. But I do know when Ralph went to trial, internal government emails got submitted, and the Army said these munitions are critical for the mission in Afghanistan. Once the New York Times published a very embarrassing article and exposed the whole situation, and then they pretended like they had no idea and they canceled our contract. There are plenty of opportunities for corruption at every step of the game, but in the logistics sphere, it is particularly vulnerable to that. People are desperate to get their goods moved from one place to another. Because you need flyover permits from each country that you transport military hardware over their airspace, we couldn't do a single delivery until every single country between Albania and Afghanistan gave us flyover permission. Turkmenistan refused to give us flyover permission. And then I realized that Turkmenistan has a national airline, and they offer cargo delivery services. So I got a cargo delivery quote from them to transport the ammunition from Albania to Afghanistan. They gave us a quote, which was surprisingly competitive. And then the next day after we accepted the quote, Turkmenistan issued the flyover permit. So all it took was a bit of a financial incentive. One fishy situation that we saw in the logistics, we had a 747 cargo aircraft loaded with about $5,600,000 worth of AK-47 ammo land in Kyrgyzstan to refuel. Kyrgyzstan is to the north of Afghanistan, and the United States has an Air Force base over there that they use as a staging point into Afghanistan. The Kyrgyzstani government claimed that we didn't have all the proper licenses, and they impounded the plane in our shipment. And we knew that we had all the proper licenses because the pilot wouldn't have taken off otherwise. So we were wondering what was going on, and it turned out that they were trying to raise the rent on the Air Force base. Eventually, they renegotiated, they doubled the rent on the Air Force base, I think to $60 million a year, and then they released our aircraft. So we were kind of pawns in this kind of strong arm tactics to try to squeeze more money out of the federal government, out of the US government. It was definitely a situation where we thought that there were various political maneuverings going on that we had no idea what was happening, and we had no control over it either. And all we could do is just inform the State Department and the U.S. Army about it and hope that they kicked it up a few levels in the chain of command and get it straightened out, which they eventually did in the Kyrgyzstani situation. When things started going well and we started delivering on a regular basis, and Costa, the Albanian box guy, was doing the repackaging, we were delivering 3-4 aircraft loads a week, Efraim decided that he wanted to squeeze more money out of the deal, as he always did. He asked Costa, the box guy, if he could find out what the Ministry of Defense was paying for the ammunition that we were buying, because we were paying Henry, the Swiss arms dealer, and we weren't paying the Albanians directly. So Costa comes back a few days later and he says, your ammunition is getting paid 2 cents a round to the Ministry of Defense. And we were paying Henry 4 cents a round. So that pissed off Efraim to no end. And so Efraim decides to go over to Albania to try to renegotiate with the Albanians and try to strike a deal directly with them. He asks me to forge a whole bunch of documents to make it look like the Albanians' competitors, our other suppliers, were giving us much better prices than they actually were. It is surprisingly easy to forge documents, particularly if you already have a legitimate document and all you have to do is change some numbers on it. And he takes those documents to the Albanians and he says, look, if you don't give me a better price, I'm going to have to go with your competition, with the Czech people, with the Ukrainians. And the Albanians take one look at it and he's like, those documents are all fake. Don't show me your fake documents. And so they knew right away. They arrange a meeting with a guy named Mikhail Deliorgi. So Efraim meets with Deliorgi and another guy who was at the meeting who he recognized later as being the prime minister's son. Deliorgi tells Efraim, I know you want a better price on the ammo. And I also know that you are paying this other Albanian guy, Costa, to do the repackaging. So why don't you give me that contract to do the repackaging? I'll make money on the repackaging contract. And then I could give you a little discount on the ammo because, I'm making money elsewhere. And Efraim said, that's a great idea. That guy's fired. You're hired. Let's do this. Costa calls me up. The box guy calls me up. And he says, hey, I understand you guys are switching suppliers to do the repackaging. I understand it's business, but I got stuck with $20,000 worth of boxes. So I tell Efraim, why don't you pay Costa 20 grand and get the boxes transferred? And Ephraim's like, nah, what's he gonna do? And I said, well, he knows everything, right? And I said, are you sure you want to do that, Efraim? He's like, yeah, he's not gonna do anything. So it turned out he was wrong, right? Because Costa got really upset over that $20,000 worth of boxes. And he called up the New York Times. And that's how the New York Times started an investigation on us that ultimately led to our downfall. And he called up the local Albanian press and informed the Albanian journalists that the Albanian politicians were getting kickbacks from our contract. And 1 or 2 weeks later, he ended up dead in mysterious circumstances. He was on a dirt road in the middle of a field, no one else around, and somehow he had been run over by his own car. They found him face down in the dirt with his car rolled like 30 feet away from him. So yeah, I mean, if it was an accident, it's a very strange accident. I think that Albania has a very long history of organized crime, and that the organized crime is intimately involved in the political system. I am definitely not going to Albania ever. I think I'm going to stay out of that country for, just in case. I am not worried about it anymore because that was about 18 years ago. And a lot of the people involved ended up going to prison in Albania. So Deliorgi, he ended up going to prison. Yili Pinari, which is the guy who was the head of the export company, ended up going to prison. The prime minister's son actually ended up suing me for defamation. The court case ended up getting tossed out. Definitely the more illegal it is, the higher the profit percentage is. I mean, that's just the nature of business. The higher the risk, the greater the reward. The Wagner Group from Russia makes some of the most profits in the world in the arms business. They provide military services to dictators in exchange for access to gold and diamond mines. Every arms deal is unique. In the example of our contract to supply Afghanistan, Henry, he was paying 2 cents a round to the Albanian government. We were paying him 4 cents a round. It cost us about 5 cents per round to do the shipping, and we were selling it to the United States government for about 10.5 cents. So we were making 1.5 cents in profit, so about 15% profit margin on that ammunition in total. In all business, there's always the element for exploitative people and organizations to take advantage of the less fortunate. In our case, when Deliorgi took over the repackaging operation, he actually had the Albanian military use soldiers to do the repackaging operation. And I highly doubt he paid them anything more than they were already getting paid with their very low salary as soldiers. While Costa, who was a private businessman, actually had to pay his workers a normal wage. They weren't getting a government salary as military personnel, so he was making a lot less money. So the New York Times published their article March 2008, and it was a very unflattering article. There was a picture of rusty-looking ammunition on the front page of the New York Times next to Efraim's mugshot. It was Bulgarian ammunition that Efraim had bought sight unseen because it was only a very small quantity, and we had some extra room on the flight from Bulgaria because we were buying the grenades from Bulgaria. It was corroded and barely functioned. And the receiving officer in Kabul took one look at it and said, "I'm not paying for this," rejected receiving it. However, they didn't have any ammunition recycling facilities in Afghanistan, and they didn't want to pay for it to get shipped back. So what they did is they moved the ammo to the side of the airport and just let it to continue corroding and rotting in the open air. And so that's when everything really fell apart. The Justice Department raided AEY's offices. I had already left at that point because Efraim informed me he didn't feel like paying me either. And so I quit. The Justice Department said, well, you guys knew that the true place of origin was China. And not only did you know, but you had a whole repackaging operation to disguise that fact. And so each certificate of conformance that you submitted to the government is an act of fraud. And you delivered 71 aircraft loads of this Chinese ammunition. So that's 71 acts of fraud, and each one can get you up to 5 years in prison. So you're looking at 355 years. Or you can plead guilty, and if you plead guilty, we'll combine 71 acts into one, and then you're only looking at 5 years maximum. So I pled guilty, and I feel very, very fortunate. I only got sentenced to 7 months of house arrest. I didn't do any prison time. Efraim probably would have gotten somewhere along the same lines, maybe a little more, but he just couldn't stay out of the arms business. Eventually, he got entrapped by the ATF into picking up a handgun, but he hired the best lawyers in Miami and got it negotiated down to like 4 years. I mean, of course I felt betrayed. He was supposedly my best friend, and all the previous contracts that we had won, he took the profits that I was supposed to get paid on that and rolled it into the next contract to finance it, because the way he put it was, listen, I'm using my money to finance these contracts. You should use your money, and you just made a bunch of money on this contract, and we just won this other contract, so why don't we take the money from that contract and use it to finance the next one, and then the next one, and then the next one, and then the final one, and then he decided not to pay me on any of it. So I didn't end up making a penny from that entire business. We are not friends. The last time I saw him was when I was suing him for the money in a deposition, and he pretended like he was happy to see me. He was like, "Oh, good to see you." I mean, like, no. Listen, when you give me the $5 million you owe me, then I'll be happy to see you, maybe. But not before. I feel like I got incredibly lucky. and that I went through a crazy experience and I managed to avoid getting killed and I managed to avoid doing prison time, and for that I am eternally grateful. Because our contract created such a massive political scandal, they tightened up some of the review process and the background check procedures that they have. I do know some people who are still in the government contracting business, and I've been told that it's has not changed that much. I'm told that that cost-plus contracts, for example, are a lot more rare these days. A cost-plus contract is where the government wants you to create a specific product or provide a specific service. They'll pay you everything that it costs you, plus a set percentage of profit. So the most famous example of this is Lockheed Martin when they build the F-35 fighter jet. When they're building a new technology platform, they don't know what it's going to cost them to develop, so they get into cost-plus contracts where whatever it costs them to develop, the government will fund plus an agreed-upon percentage of profit. SpaceX has contracts with NASA to transport astronauts to the International Space Station, and those are all flat-fee contracts. They developed that entire capability on a flat-fee basis, not on a cost-plus basis. So that's one of the first major aerospace contracts that was done on a fixed price contract. So the way the War Dogs movie happened was Rolling Stone published a very long article about our story in 2011 after we were sentenced. The movie definitely makes it more exciting than it was on a day-to-day basis, but by and large I think it's a very well done movie, and I was very happy with how it came out. It ended up being about 70% accurate. I have 3 seconds of on-screen fame. In the scene where Miles Teller, the guy who's playing me, is trying to sell bed sheets to a nursing home, in like the first 5 minutes of the movie, there's a guy there who's playing guitar for the old folks there at the assisted living facility. The scene that most people ask me about whether it was true was the Triangle of Death scene. And the funny thing about that scene is that it actually is true, but with a big caveat. It didn't happen to us. It happened to the guy who wrote the War Dogs screenplay. His name is Stephen Chin. We never went to Iraq. There was a Beretta deal, which is what the whole Triangle of Death scene was based on. That part is true, but we actually ended up defaulting on that contract. We never delivered on that contract. Another scene that was completely fictionalized was the scene where Efraim buys weed and then gets ripped off and then pulls out a machine gun and fires it in the air and, gets his $300 back. That never happened. We did have automatic weapons in the trunk. That's true. We're federal firearms license holders, so we were legally allowed to have automatic weapons. And we would take fully automatic Uzi submachine guns to the range and fire them off at the range, and everyone else is popping off pistols, and we'd be like, and everyone else would get quiet and start, who's that? So that was cool. But we never used it in a drug deal. There's always the risk of corruption in the arms trade. A lot of it is done in a very quiet manner because there's an enormous political element. The arms trade is always a game of cat and mouse, and the people who are trying to get around the enforcement mechanisms in the international trade are always looking for loopholes, and the people enforcing it are always trying to close those loopholes. So I couldn't tell you whether there are more loopholes open now than closed ones, but I'm sure they're different ones. Government contracting in general gives you some interesting insights on what the government is doing around the world. When I was doing government contracting, I saw a contract for security services for an army base in Chad. There's nothing about Chad in the news. But I saw this odd contract and I was like, I wonder what's going on over there. And then like 4 months later, the US Army is mounting a whole anti-terror operation against various like Islamic groups in the region over there. So when you look at what the government's trying to buy, you can kind of get a finger on the pulse of what the government is intending on doing. Now, with the outbreak of war in Ukraine, the United States has realized that a lot of our industrial capacity that we were relying on for large-scale wars is gone because we didn't think we'd be fighting another one. So to supply Ukraine, because it was such an emergency and Ukraine needed it so fast and so badly, the United States supplied its own weapons from its own stockpiles and then worked on replenishing its own stockpiles. I hope that the arms business fades into a smaller and smaller segment of the economy and eventually disappears altogether at some point. I definitely think that humanity can spend their money on much more productive things than on ways of killing each other. Unfortunately, it doesn't seem like conflict is going away anytime soon, the Ukraine war being the most glaring example of that. And I think the future of military conflicts is probably going to be in large part fought by drones and automatic systems. There are several international frameworks to try to limit illicit arms trafficking. Organized crime within the United States and internationally is made possible through the illicit arms trade. The cartels wouldn't be able to smuggle the drugs that they do without the weapons to back that up. The issue with international agreements is that they're only as strong as the enforcement mechanisms, and there is no true international law enforcement agency. People ask me if I feel guilty for supplying weapons, which is a method of people killing each other. I would say in the case of our Afghan contract, I didn't feel guilty at all because we were supplying the people fighting the Taliban. I think the Taliban are, the people of Afghanistan would be better off without the Taliban in power. There are people out there who think that any trade in the arms business is evil, and I don't think that that is true. I think that you can use a gun to kill somebody. You could also use a gun to prevent yourself from being killed by somebody. And I do think that people who are getting attacked deserve the capability to defend themselves. The defense industry, like any industry, is a business. Do I think it's wrong to make money off of weapons? Well, it depends who the weapons are going to. In my early 20s, bumped into a friend of mine named Efraim Diveroli, and he had gotten into the arms trade through his uncle, who owned a big pawn shop in LA. He was about 4 years younger than me at the time, so he was actually 18 years old at the time. And when we bumped into each other, I told him about the businesses I was doing, and he said, well, you know, a lot of those skills can be applied to my business as well, because I need to find suppliers overseas, arrange shipping, logistics, financing, etc. So why don't you come work with me, because I could use a partner. He showed me his bank account, and he had $1.8 million in cash in his bank account after working in the business for a single year. So I thought, well, he's making a lot more money than me, so there's something I could learn here. So I said, I'm in, teach me what you know. And that's how I got into the arms trade. We were working literally 18 hours a day. The way federal government contracting works, when the United States wants to buy something, they have to legally, well, with the exception of the CIA's black budget, the rest of the federal government has to legally post what they want to buy on their public website, which these days is sam.gov. And then anyone who is qualified to bid on those contracts can submit a bid. They analyze the various offers they have, and the person with the best score wins the contract and gets the opportunity to deliver those goods or that service and collect a profit. In theory, they're supposed to look through the background of the companies that are bidding and see if they have any previous cancellations for cause, and it lowers the chances that you will win further contracts. There's definitely plenty of room for improvement. The issue with the federal government is that there are many, many agencies, and a lot of times they don't talk to each other. So you can have contractors who have acted in bad faith or have messed up with a contract with one agency, and then another agency gives them a contract because they didn't check the records of the other agencies about the history of this particular contractor. Any contract of under $250,000 is considered a small contract. Once you win a few of those, then you qualify to bid on the bigger contracts, on the multi-million-dollar contracts. And once you win a few of those, you're qualified to bid on the tens and hundreds of millions of dollar contracts. In the space of a year and a half, we went from winning like under $1 million to $300 million. While I was under house arrest, I had the idea for my first business, my first invention. It's called the BeatBuddy. My company, Singular Sound, that manufactures the BeatBuddy, we came out with 8 other products, and so all music related. I came up with another idea for the mass market with my brother called Instafloss, which is a device that flosses all your teeth for you. And my latest business is called War Dogs Academy, where I teach people how to do government contracting. Ever since the movie came out, I've had literally hundreds, if not thousands, of people contact me asking me to teach them how to do government contracting. And of course, I had been banned from doing government contracting for about 15 years. I recently got off the banned list. We built an entire course to teach people how to start a business, how to register it with the government, and how to win government contracts and build a long-term legal government contracting business.
Hi, I'm a producer on How Crime Works. If you enjoyed this video, then please subscribe and comment below with more ideas of topics you'd like us to cover in this series.